Hi, everyone.
Greetings. In the last segment, the beginning of Genesis 39, 1-5, we made the point that it repeatedly says in this chapter, God is with Joseph, but all the outward circumstances don't indicate that. I mean, he's become a slave, he's lost his family, he's lost his land and his inheritance. But the point is made over and over again, and in this section particularly, that God is with him, and that that's not just apparent to him, it's apparent to those around him in Egypt.
Yeah, so they have a favorable view of him because of the evidence of God blessing him.
So there's the paradox of providence, that sometimes outward circumstances are not telling you the truth about your situation.
Okay.
So we're starting at Genesis 39, verse 6.
Yes. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and it came to pass that after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me, but you, because you are his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her.
But one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house."
So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner," that his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison, whatever they did there, and it was his doing. And the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper.
Yeah, in the last segment we had a quote from James Straughn in his book Hebrew Ideals, where he made the point that it's not just that God arranges the furniture of your life providentially, but he actually changes the hearts and minds of the people around you. Straughn was making the point that both Laban in the story of Jacob earlier, and here Pharaoh later, and Potiphar in this chapter, all of them are affected, and God is working on their affections and their perceptions. And we often forget that when we're thinking about the importance of outward circumstances and the role of suffering in the plan. That sometimes it's such things that touch the hearts of people and cause them to become sympathetic toward you, and to change their attitude towards you and to your God.
Yeah. So, and I thought it was interesting that when he's speaking to the wife, he talks about the advantages he has as the master has put in his hands, but he has kept her from him. And then he says he talks more about it being a sin against God. So this is his higher authority. He could have talked himself into thinking, well, I am pretty important, so maybe this would be okay. But he sees it as a sin against God.
Yeah.
So I think that is his motivation.
But you do notice too, though, that there's a common morality here. We are nearly 4,000 years ago here,
Yeah.
and contrary to what we think, especially we who come from a witness background, we think that the pagans are just
Loosey-goosey and don't care.
amoral or immoral. No, they have a morality. It might not, and probably is not as high as the morality that we think we're holding to faithfully. But on the other hand, you see here that in Egypt, nearly 4,000 years ago, a man had a wife.
And he considered it wrong. He would consider it wrong, and even the wife knows he would consider it wrong.
That's right.
So they had a morality. I think this is sometimes used as kind of a discouragement for people to even bother with the Bible. You're told, well, I would be the kind of person I am without the Bible. I don't need the Bible to have morality. So there is an element of truth in that people know what's right and wrong.
They have conscience.
That's right. Even Paul says that. So even people without law know what's right and wrong.
A law within
God has
themselves.
given us the conscience for that reason.
And not only that, but all of these men, whether they're Egyptians or sons of Jacob, are all descended from the same stock. So there is a morality that seems to have descended down, at least through the lines of Shem, but here you can see it in the line of Ham, that there's a common consensus about what are
right.
socially unacceptable sins.
Right.
And that includes rape here, that includes adultery. So when we think of the pagan mind, we should not forget that they have their own standards. They're not as high as they should be, but neither are ours.
Yeah. Even here,
even Jacob, who doesn't have a very good example in his family. His father has effectively Joseph has effectively, Jacob has effectively 4 wives.
Yeah.
So Jacob has not given a good example to his stock, but Joseph is superior morality to his father.
And I mean, this is pre-law too. I mean, they haven't even left Egypt, so they don't really have a law. So, when you think about it, where did they get this morality? Where did Joseph get it? Where did Job get it? Because Job had very high moral standards. And he's pre-law.
And the answer seems to be that we're in a degraded stage of religious history here. And this is another thing that's contrary to the usual narrative you get from the secular world, which is that religion developed and evolved from simple to more complex, from more degraded to be more sophisticated, etc. But in the religious history as told in the Bible, it's the opposite way around. We start with a lofty monotheism, even though we're sinners.
Yeah.
And it descends within a few thousand years to polytheism, which is what's happening here in the Egyptian empire. As in all empires, there's what we now tend to call multiculturalism, where all the gods are acceptable, all the religions have a place, they're all tolerated, but some gods are higher than others.
Yeah.
But between monotheism and polytheism, you have this stage called henotheism, which many religions or traditions get stuck in, i.e. one God who is superior to all the others. So there is a concept that there is one supreme God who might be the creator of all, but somehow these other gods have a lot of power. And that seems to be the stage that you are in the book of Genesis most of the time.
And I think the story illustrates that you can be degraded. You have to develop a God consciousness.
Yeah.
You have to develop your conscience. You can sear your conscience so that it doesn't bother you anymore, certain things.
And of course that happens more readily in a situation where certain sins are now tolerated because of the size of the population, the empire, the polytheism of the time. It becomes easier and easier to lose your morality. I think that's the phase we're at right now in Western culture. We've lost our God, the vision of the supreme God who has the right to declare what his will is for us. We've lost that vision, and as a result we're headed towards chaos, as polytheism tends to.
Yeah, and I think we've lost the idea. I think law has always been for practical purposes. People follow laws, not always because they agree with them or like them, but it's the consensus of your society.
That's right.
So if that starts to wane, which I think we are living in a time when it's waning,
Yep.
and people not only don't like it, but they won't do it. So the more we get into that, the less people are just more chaos is
Yeah.
what's going to happen.
And the scary part for us, as for all these empires that are in the Bible, is that can only go on so long before tyranny is the result.
Yeah.
Empire doesn't put up with chaos. They'll tolerate it for a while until it becomes impossible. And that happened in Egypt, it happened in Babylon, it happened in Greece and Rome. And it's happening to us, apparently.
Yeah.
So here's a couple of quotes. Nahum Sarna is a Jewish commentator, by the way. In his book, Understanding Genesis, he says this: probably nothing is more indicative of the wide chasm separating Israel from its neighbors than the line of argument used by Joseph in rejecting the repeated entreaties of the would-be adulteress. Speaking to a pagan woman, he says that his submission would be both a violation of the confidence placed in him by his master and a sin against God. It is not a matter of social impropriety or breach of convention, not just an indignity to the husband or an outrage upon society. This concept of morality, as God-given rather than utilitarian, suffuses the Torah legislation and explains a fundamental difference in its treatment of adultery from that of the ancient law codes of the Near East. In the latter, the guilty parties are regarded as having committed an affront to the husband, who for that reason is accorded the power to determine the punishment.
Then we've got Derek Kidner says, Joseph's reason for refusal were those that another man's might have given for yielding. So neutral is the force of the circumstances. His freedom from supervision and his rapid promotion, which had corrupted other stewards, and his realization that one realm only was barred from him, which others from Eve onwards have considered as a frustration, were all arguments to him for loyalty. By giving the proposition its right name as wickedness, he made truth his ally, and he related all to God. He rooted his loyalty to his master deep enough to hold. That's good.
And you had Mr. Alfred Edersheim as well?
Yeah. He says, it is a common mistake to suppose that earnest religion and uprightness must necessarily be attended by success, even in this world. It is indeed true that God will not withhold any good from those whose sun and shield he is. But then success may not always be a good thing for them. Besides, God often tries the faith and patience of his people, and that is the meaning of many trials. Still oftener are they needed for discipline and training, or they may learn to glorify God in their sufferings. In the case of Joseph, it was both a temptation and a trial by which he was prepared, outwardly and inwardly, for the position he was to occupy. He firmly resisted evil, alike from a sense of integrity towards his master, and above all, from dread of this great wickedness and sin against God. Yeah, so I think he makes good points there about it being a test really preparing you for life. Everything that happens to you.
Yeah, we realize
how you decide is testing you.
And it takes 22 years from the moment he arrives in Egypt for him to get to the point where he's ready to be not only the savior of Egypt as their prime minister, but also the savior of his own family and the nation of Israel. A great type of Christ. And then Campbell Morgan, it is a striking fact that the main impression of this whole section is that of the corruption of the family of Jacob. In the midst of it, however, there is the wonderful story of the eldest born son of his beloved Rachel maintaining his purity in the midst of the most trying circumstances and against fierce temptation.
Mm.
So Joseph is also the beginning of that remnant principle that's throughout the history of Israel and unto today, where you have a remnant of Messianic Jews, even in Israel, 30,000 of them.
Mm.
Joseph is the one member of his family who has personal integrity, it would seem, at this point, although some of them seem to learn it in the next part of the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are our links? Divine Names, I think. There's a 5-video series we did 4 years ago, and it traces the religious decline of the world, original monotheism through henotheism to polytheism, and then puts in the thought that the religion of Yahweh, the covenant relationship between Yahweh and his people Israel, is the beginning of the correction or the reformation of that corrupt world that is being born here in the time of the first empires, Egypt and Babylon. So I'll put the link into the first of that series and the Divine Names, 5 videos linked together.
Okay.
See you soon.